8 years ago, in 2018, Project Moon has officially released their first ever game, called Lobotomy Corporation. An extremely unfair, glitchy, yet a very cool management simulator, which lets you take the role of X, the manager of said corporation, where your job is to manage different types of monsters called abnormalities. And abnormalities were the things that made the game as interesting as it was. After all, considering how popular the SCP was back in the day, the idea of managing world-ending monstrosities, horrifying abominations, or some cute and dumb creature was the big hook that led to a great majority of people to play this game at the time, especially since there was no proper SCP management sim type of game at the time. Any good ones, at least. Now, as time went on, with the release of Library of Ruina and Limbus Company in particular, the number of abnormalities began to increase. So, I began to wonder, how many abnormalities are there actually? Well, to answer this question very simply, there are, as of recording this, only 177 unique abnormalities to be officially released in the world of Project Moon, with more abnormalities to slowly but surely appear as time goes on. Now, this is quite a big number, you know? With the amount of abnormalities that I can recognize, I'm surprised that there are this many of them in there, and a couple more to be added as well. Like, Jesus. The amount of effort that Project Moon puts into making these things is insane. However, what if I told you now, right, that there are more abnormalities that you don't even know existed? Abnormalities that never really entered the big screen. Abnormalities that have tried to appear, but eventually have gone unreleased, shall we say. Hello everyone, and welcome to the unresolved case of the Unreleased Abnormalities. See what I did there? Unresolved, unreleased. Yeah. Okay, cool. I'll just move on. This is a video that I've tried to make again and again for a few months now, but I couldn't really figure out how to properly make it since there is quite a bit to go through with this sort of topic. And trust me, there is. After all, I'm on the 177 abnormalities that have been released. There is also an extra 48 that have either just never been released in any sort of way, or have been released but are just not canon in the world of Project Moon. And in this video, we will go through all of them. But you might be asking, Mr. Crow, isn't that a bit too much? And that I say, yes it is. But here's something that I want to mention in regards to that. You see, the thing with unreleased content is that there is usually missing information, so we either know little about an abnormality, or in some cases, we know just enough. Now, there might be more abnormalities hidden that no one but Project Moon knows about, that have just never been revealed, assuming that they have not forgotten about them if that is indeed the case. So with that in mind, it's not that big of a problem, since a good majority of these abnormalities lack the amount of information that a normal abnormality has. Not to say that all of them don't, just a good few of them. So don't be too surprised when I talk a lot about one or two abnormalities with a good amount of detail, and then a couple minutes later I talk little about the next few since, well, duh, lack of information. And plus, you can use the timestamps to go through which abnormalities you want to see, so yeah. All that I'm saying is that it's not that big of a problem. But either way, with all of that exposition out of the way, let's begin with our first case of unrevealed abnormalities. I think the best way to start this case off is with Legacy Lob Corp, since I presume that some people are at least somewhat familiar with this one. Maybe. But if you don't know, before Lob Corp was officially released, Project Moon had a sort of open beta build of Lobotomy Corporation, which is now called Legacy Lob Corp, which was a somewhat different game than what it is currently. Hell, you can still play it right now through certain methods if you want to, but you can do that after watching this video if you wish. Right now though, we have to cover two specific abnormalities that were in Legacy Lob Corp, but have never been transferred to the official release due to unknown reasons. Those being Poor Screener's Note and Hammer of Light. Now, technically speaking, Price of Silence also belongs in that category, but I won't be counting it as an unreleased abnormality since it does exist in Library of Ruina. Either way though, these two are somewhat interesting, I suppose. Starting with Hammer of Light, otherwise known as $0 for some particular reason by Angela, the Hammer of Light is a Zane class abnormality that is covered in chains, and because of those chains you cannot interact with it at all, or to be specific, with its ability. You can still work with it, but the moment abnormalities escape and you reach Panic Level 2, or in proper terms, the second warning, the chains release themselves from the hammer and you can send an employee to finally use the hammer. And once you do that, the employee transforms into a pure white ghostly being, in, and then teleports to every single abnormality that is out of containment to kill them. The user of the hammer can summon clones to support them in execution as well, and the user as well as the clones are very strong, with massive amounts of HP, damage, and sanity. Once they deal with all of the abnormalities and everything has calmed down, the employee dies and disappears, turning into sand. Now, from what we can read in the entries and a thing called the Final Observation, a tiny mechanic and legacy version that allows the manager to directly interact with an abnormality, sometimes revealing tiny lore pieces, we can tell that the Hammer of Light was meant to be a weapon for a hero who usually has some unlucky traits to them that will appear in the right place in the right time, hence the chains. Quote, "These chains are likely to be part of the abnormality. When the proper situation comes, the chains are loosened. These chains' purpose is to tell a right time to use the hammer, not to lock it." The entries also talk about an incident about a certain employee that used the hammer when a massive breakout happened, and the fact that the employee died after all of this was resolved. Overall, it's a pretty cool and simple to understand abnormality that was removed because, in my opinion, it was probably far too OP for a Zane class abnormality. But I believe it was also the implementation of the rabbits, which fulfills a somewhat similar role to the hammer, a more possible reason as to why the hammer was removed. Either way, we'll never truly know. However, unlike Hammer of Light, Poor Screenwriter's Note is a little bit more complicated. This WoW level abnormality is a book, and within this book contains a script about a screenplay called Peccatum Proprium, where a person commits mass murder across 6 different acts. However, out of these 6 acts, we only get to see acts 1, 3, and 6 in the entries. Act 1 starts off with A, the protagonist, picking up a mask that is seemingly invisible to everyone else but him. He picks it up and starts to ramble on about how foolish and pathetic I was, for what had I talked about happiness, for what had I put up with all the fuck my English, meretriciousness. And eventually, he kills a character called The Failed, and we move on to the 3rd act, where he contemplates whether he's a killer or if the mask has possessed him to become one. However, he eventually deludes himself, saying that it is just a mask, but not for me, fools. From the beginning, I knew the power that this mask has. And eventually, we reach Act 6, where A got some off-screen character development and blames himself for all the murder, and wishes to die by the hands of God as punishment. Eventually, he gets his wish from someone else, who has shot him down, and the curtains close. This entire screenplay plays similarly in gameplay as well, where if an employee fails to do its job and an abnormality gets a bad mood, curtains will appear and the employee will become A, the protagonist, and 4 more employees of the same department will become their victims: the failed, the abandoned, the broken, and the coward. You cannot control the mentioned employees, and the victims cannot protect themselves at all, so all 4 of them will eventually die. And once they all do die, you, the manager, will now play the role of the shooter in the final act, with a timer counting down, where you get the decision to either just shoot the killer for some reason, you don't get anything from it, you just do. You kill the target, miss the shot intentionally, or shoot someone else, like an abnormality for example. There is no decision to not shoot at all, since once the timer runs out, you automatically shoot. And I find that kind of funny and somewhat ironic, since after all, this abnormality is quite obvious in what it's meant to represent, right? Iron and the screenplay, where A is, well, A, the victims being the Sephira, supposedly, and the shooter is Angela, again, supposedly, since the plot is somewhat different to what it is now, but I think it's still partially accurate to say that this is what the abnormality is meant to represent within the game, even if it's partially outdated. It's a cool and unique abnormality, but now I'm just wondering why it was removed in the first place, despite being this unique. Maybe it has something to do with notes of a crazy researcher, since they have somewhat similar enough themes of being about iron, or maybe it's the gameplay, I don't know. But still, it was removed regardless, and I'm not willing to go too deep into hypothetical reasons as to why certain abnormalities didn't make the cut or not. So, whatever. Alright, now with that, we are now officially leaving Legacy to pre-release now, where these next bunch of abnormalities are the abnormalities that have never been released in any of Project Moon's games, including Legacy Lob Corp. Now, the only reason why we know they exist is because they either appeared in some unknown teaser for Lob Corp, the official Lobotomy Corporation art book, or the, now defunct, official Lob Corp website. Some we know little about, some we know a bunch. It depends on what and where we got that information. But either way, we have a lot to go through since there are a bunch of them. Like, look at this list that I have to go through. Jesus Christ. So, without wasting any more time, let's start with our first abnormality and we can go from there. The beanstalk without Jack was a giant beanstalk reaching up and up and up endlessly, which can only be found in the art book, and had a sprite data mined in Legacy Lob Corp. Obviously, this abnormality was a reference to the fairy tale Jack and the Beanstalk, where the poor boy, Jack, grows a beanstalk to the heavens and meets an ogre and becomes rich. Now, the difference between that fairy tale and the abnormality is, well, the lack of Jack. But that's only from the name alone, and we don't really know anything about what it could have done if it was a legacy. However, from the art book, we have a note from an employee saying, quote, "It may sound like some ridiculous story, but I heard there was one employee who was determined to get all the way up to the top of the tree, and eventually started to climb. If the tree even has a concept of a top, then I guess the employee is doing well up there. From this alone, I believe that this abnormality was probably a sacrificial one, maybe, where we send an employee up the beanstalk and we get some energy from that. Kind of like we can change anything, I suppose. I don't know. I'm gonna guess in here that's it, but the abnormality looks pretty cool, despite being just a giant plant. A black cat with green eyes, Puss in Boots is pretty cool. This catty abnormality is a big reference to the original fairy tale, not the movie about the Spanish cat, where a magical cat earns his master a lot of wealth and fortune, which the art book made a partial reference to, saying, quote, "Rarely do I talk to humans. You should consider it an honor. The humans who have joined me could attain greater wealth and glory. I told you the story of a humble farmer's son who I made a king." Now, the biggest thing that you may have noticed from this abnormality is, well, the lack of boots. From what can be seen in the now defunct website and what is partially seen from the portrait, it's very clear that this cat doesn't have his shoes. Now, whether that would be something important that the abnormality story would focus on or not, we'll never know. But I imagine that this abnormality would be pretty cool, with maybe some cool mechanic where you get a bunch of lob points from working on it successfully or something like that. That would be quite dope. Also, I like cats, so I like this abnormality as well. We'll love to see it again one day. The warden is pretty grotesque looking, shall we say. Now, we know absolutely nothing about the warden, but from the art book, and the art book alone, because we have nothing else about it, it looked like it was a massive abnormality where its top half is only muscle and bone, and it wears a dress, presumably made of flesh, that it can raise to show its many legs, arms, and faces, for some reason. Maybe this is its reaching form or something like that. From the name alone, warden seems to be some sort of guardian overseeing something. Hell, I guess? I don't know. But warden looks very fucking sick and I like it. Book without pictures or dialogue is meh. It's just an older brown book which, according to the art book, quote, "When one has filled book without pictures or conversation in whatever way, then the book may grant one wish. It may sound absurd, but many take the rumor quite seriously. So it can grant wishes. Great, don't really know how that would transfer to gameplay, but to be honest, I don't really care that much about it either way. It's mid as fuck looking and it's boring." This abnormality is probably one of the few unreleased abnormalities that quite a few people might know about. Nori Nori, otherwise known as Not Little Helper in the official art book, is a bipedal fox-looking yet is actually a cat abnormality that is quite suck-looking. I love it. As I said before, a couple of people might know who Nori Nori is from an early trailer called Lobotomy Corp joined to our manager as one of the two abnormalities shown in this trailer, along with Big Bird, where it splits its entire body in half and uses its saws and blades connected to its real body to kill a bunch of people, which is rad as fuck. Now, why would it do that? Well, according to Project Moon in an interview, they, quote, "needed footage of a human sacrifice. This trailer originally was supposed to have Nameless Fetus, but since its animations were incomplete at the time, we had to use the fox fellow as a substitute. However, it seems like he couldn't be released due to a combination of circumstances, according to Project Moon." Now, there are other models that were data mined as well that do exist, and it seems like it could escape, which is nice, I suppose. A good majority of information that we do know are gameplay based though. We know practically in the lore department, which is fine. I don't mind it. Someone's portrait is, well, a portrait of an old man with red eyes, and that's it. Wow, what a disappointment. I mean, there's a quote that says, "I swear that damn portrait was trying to make us lower our guard. Why else would it show absolutely no movement during all the observations and work were done?" So was it like Burrow in Heaven where it doesn't move at all if you look at it, but kills some employees if you don't? I suppose, maybe. The art kind of suggests that, but I don't know. The Jansen tiger is a giant fluffy tiger with a friendly little face and a hat. It looks cute. From the artwork, we know that it's supposed to be something like a mascot or something for children, so it is meant to be cute. However, it also can reform its face for a friendly image. Now, with that in mind, it can also reform its face for other things. In the Abnormalities case, it can lure and eat low-level employees, which is something, but it does make sense why the Abnormality actually does it, since the Abnormality is based on the Korean urban legend of the same name, which was a creature that will lure in victims with a woman's cry for help until they eat them. So yeah, it most likely just would have worked like red shoes, but instead of the employee grabbing the shoes and going ham, they just die instead, and probably breaches as well, maybe. It looks like it breached, but no one knows. Still looks cute though. Now, me personally, I don't really like mythical horses that much, like unicorns or pegasi, so I'm not the biggest fan of Pale Horse as well, but I do like its gimmick quite a bit. From the art book and an entry from Legacy Sand Machine, for some reason, we know that this abnormality can sense the scent of death, and apparently it's quite emotional over the fact. Quote, Joseph came to me screaming, his face flushed with excitement. He told me that an abnormality he'd been taken care of suddenly knelt down and began to shed tears as it looked at him. The horse wasn't acting friendly or anything, it simply sensed the scent of death that permeated him. You can probably also talk, apparently, from that Sand Machine entry that I mentioned as well. So yeah, I'm just interested in how this gimmick would work in gameplay. How would it predict death? And me personally, I have zero fucking clue. Maybe it like prevents an employee to die from a certain abnormality or something like that. I genuinely have no clue. Maybe that's why it was removed, too complicated to make into gameplay, but that's just my guess. This abnormality is interesting, but I wish we had more on it to discuss. Fallen Amordad is a person covered in blood, plants, and flowers, which can, quote, hear all the meaningless words I have said and will say in the future, and perfectly understand them. Now, what does that say about the abnormality? Not much, I'll be honest. In fact, there isn't much else to say here, other than the fact that it's meant to represent some divine being known as an Amesha Spenta of immortality and plants. Now, I'm not too sure on this one, to be honest, and I think it's better for my sake if I move on and let others explain what that means for me. So yeah, please do that. Thank you. Rope and cord is cute, I guess. This is one of those abnormalities that is just two entities in one being a blue goat and the other being a pink leopard, and both of them are sitting on a big old rope. They also have a sort of ability that when activated would have their eyes flash, which is cool, I guess. They've also been used in an artwork of a Twitter apology post, so that's something. Don't really have much else to say for this abnormalities, other than the fact that it doesn't really look special, nor do I find it particularly intriguing, so yeah. Sphinx is just like Fallen Amordad, in which it's interesting, but it doesn't really have much to talk about. But even less than Amordad, since we only know that it exists from this artwork alone, which actually kind of looks cool. It seems like it was going to be asleep until it opens its one big eye and does something, but to be honest, I really don't have much to add on to that one, which is sad, but again, that's the truth of unreleased content. The 7 princesses are not one whole abnormality, but are rather a group of 7 different abnormalities. Kind of like how the 3 birds and the magical girls are part of their own groups, whilst being separate abnormalities. But when it comes to the 7 princesses, we only know the identities of 3 of them. 2 of them being Unreleased, aka the Little Mermaid and Cinderella's Pumpkin Carriage, and the last one being Snow White's Apple. Now, sadly, I can't really talk about any of them actually, since Snow White's Apple is, well, not released. And there isn't much to talk about the Pumpkin Carriage and the mermaids, since the most we know about them is that they did exist once thanks to the art book, and that's it. Which is sad because that would be a pretty cool video on its own, and it would be quite interesting to cover all the princesses one by one. But then again, I feel like we can guess who the last 4 of them are, since the 3 abnormalities that we do know are based off of princesses in some very old fairy tales. So maybe some like, I don't know, Rapunzel, I guess. I don't know princesses, don't ask me. I'll be honest and say, without the wiki to help me describe what I was seeing, I would have no fucking clue on what sort of abnormality I would be looking at. Siren seems to be a small abnormality covered in cogs and has a massive phonograph that takes the role of its head, hence the name, Siren. It has 2 legs and a wheel to move around, and also has this thing, which is probably some wires that are connected to a wall to support its huge phonograph. I don't know. But along with the weird design, it also has the ability to sing the past. I have no fucking clue what that means or what that would do in terms of gameplay, but oh well. Now this one is quite interesting. Distorted form is one singular abnormality that is also made up of different parts, from creatures, machinery, etc. It looks cool, but just like the last few, we only know it exists because of the artwork, and that's it. Though I am sort of interested in how it would work. Maybe it would deal all types of damage, considering that it's a sort of combination of multiple different parts, I suppose, but I guess we'll just never know. Gods of the Seasons are like the 7 princesses, in which they are a group of abnormalities, but are less interesting to me personally. The 3 gods that we know of, at least, spring, autumn, and winter, look meh, I guess, but they do fit with the seasons, so that's nice, I guess. But the other 2, the summer deity and the spring deity, Takao and Pans respectively, are a tad bit more interesting. Their designs look fucking amazing, especially Takao, but again, we only know they exist from the artwork. But I do wonder what the differences are between the gods and deities. Maybe, considering that there is a spring god and spring deity, maybe you can like transform certain gods into deities in some way, like a Pokemon evolution or something like that. I don't know, I'm just spewing some bullshit right here. This one is probably my favorite looking unreleased abnormality out of them all. Mist Reaper is an abnormality that is composed of 2 beings, a little girl and a tall being. Now, just like with the last few, we only have the artwork to work with, but my god does it look so good. The change between the man just looking at the girl, looking a tad bit happy, reaching out to her, and then a big hand shows up from the big being and he cries. Like, god, it's so good. But along with this artwork, there's also a quote that states, "I should have said, I'm sorry that I let go of your hand and apologized, even if it didn't mean anything. I'm sorry to ask this, but can you take me to that room again, please?" Now, it does seem like this quote is said by the man, but what does it actually mean? Well, with the context of the tall thing that is next to the girl being called the Angel of Death, according to the wiki, and this image right here, it seems like whatever this room is, it's probably some sort of paradise, I guess, at the cost of someone's life, or your life, I don't know. Maybe I'm taking this too literally, but it still is very fucking cool either way. I love this abnormality. This abnormality is very freaky looking, and for all the right reasons. Clown smiling at me is, well, a clown. Now, it'll look like it's nothing special at first glance. After all, it's just a very horrifying looking clown, but from the sprite and the quote, it seems like it's carrying some tools and the like, and apparently it will do something depending on whether you are entertained by the clown. Quote, "I should have left the containment unit as soon as possible. Seeing that I wasn't amused, it took out another tool. I thought it was a tool, just that moment." It probably would have caused a bunch of employees to panic a bunch, but would also provide some benefits if we get a good result, I suppose. But other than all of that, there's not much else to say, I guess. Out of all of the unreleased abnormalities that I've talked about, this abnormality is indeed an interesting one to talk about, since the abnormality, my sweet orange tree, actually has quite a bit in it, because unlike the other unreleased abnormalities that were data mined and only had, at minimum, its sprite, this one had more than just a sprite. It had things like lore and flavor text behind it that were also data mined during Legacy Lob Corp, which is interesting because this tells us that my sweet orange tree was going to be in Legacy Lob Corp just as much as some other unreleased abnormalities that were data mined, but in this case, Project Moon decided against it for some particular reason just a few days before Legacy was released. I wonder why, but either way, let's go through what we know of it one by one. First introduced in the teaser trailer of the Lobotomy Corporation, my sweet orange tree was a WoW level abnormality made up of particles of multiple colors, specifically green, blue, and yellow. Now, there is no knowledge on what it's meant to do in terms of gameplay, but from what is known, specifically in things like flavor text and lore behind it, it seems like this abnormality was focused on causing some employees to forcefully panic, or to be specific, an employee that is working with it, since the abnormality causes them to be trapped in the world that my sweet orange tree has shown, and are captivated by the stage of my sweet orange tree and began to forget the reality. Now, what is that world or stage that the flavor text is mentioning? Well, it seems to be any specific childhood memory or moment within the employees, with text like, "If you have any piece of innocence of childhood left, and why should children grow up?" In fact, this abnormality really wants us to remember our childhood dreams and memories, to the point that it forces itself into our brains to do that, which also causes some unintentional psychological damage because of its desire for a child's purity. Now, despite the powerful ability on hand, this world can be interrupted by sending in another employee to help before being consumed by the innocent childhood dream turned real, which is surprisingly simple for something that is meant to be a WoW level abnormality. Though, I guess it does work similarly to Snow Queen, and Snow Queen is also a WoW, so I don't know. Though, maybe with more information on the gameplay, then I would probably be more convinced otherwise, so yeah. I should also mention that this abnormality also takes some inspiration from a book of the same name as the abnormality, which has similar themes of childhood innocence and imagination, which is pretty cool, I'd say. Okay, so here we are. This is the last batch of abnormalities that I want to cover, and this one is about a specific non-canon book that Project Moon has made around the time when Library of Ruina was releasing, called Wonderlab. Now, when I say that Wonderlab is not canon, I'm saying it very loosely, since the reasons as to why Wonderlab is considered to be non-canon in the first place is not due to any sort of in-game lore or anything like that, and it's more due to a certain controversy that we all might know that led to the artist of Wonderlab to eventually cut ties with Project Moon and made a request to officially take down Wonderlab from being officially read, which Project Moon has complied to, and thus the community has sort of decided that Wonderlab is no longer canon to the world of Project Moon, and it became a sort of fan-made novel. I mean, you can make your own opinion on this debacle. I've seen some people mention that they think Wonderlab can be canon but just would most likely never be referenced to ever again, since Wonderlab still makes some sense in the world, and the fact that this is all more of an outsider intervention, it's very unclear. And me personally, I want to talk about the abnormalities in this video, and that's it, since they have not been released and I want to shed some light on them. With that being said though, I'm not going to cover the plot of Wonderlab. There's a good video about it already, and you can read it as well if you are interested. Unofficially, that is. It's pretty good. But with all of that out of the way, let's begin with the first abnormality in Wonderlab. Dingle Dangle is a 10th level abnormality that is practically just a bunch of ribbons that are connected to a pillar, and it also has pink hair-like things on the ground that it can manipulate to tangle you up, which also causes delirium to anyone with prudence level 3 or above. It also apparently wants everyone to become fruits and hang together and dangle down, of which we do see the result of in some people, which actually looks pretty. I like it. Now, as an introductory abnormality to Wonderlab, it unsurprisingly doesn't have much in it, other than some themes of suicide or something like that, I guess. My Sweet Home is quite literally a tiny little house, and is yet another 10th level abnormality. My Sweet Home is an abnormality that would love to hear all of your troubles like a therapist, supporting you and you alone, all for its own gain of escaping. You see, despite it liking attachment a bunch, if you commit to being too attached to it, My Sweet Home will try to convince you to enter it, all in the words of comforting you from your troubles, since, in its words, I'm a home, a happy little home, and you're always safe in your home, right? And once you do enter the abnormality, it escapes and increases in size, with the victim inside it becoming a part of the home. It's actually quite a cool abnormality that I can see having such a mechanic in the game, which is one of the few things that I think Wonderlab does very well. A lot of its abnormalities, you can see what they could have done gameplay wise if they were in Lobotomy Corporation, but either way though, pretty cool abnormality. Our first key level abnormality, White Lake, is quite a pretty abnormality until it isn't. White Lake takes the role of an innocent swan-like maiden when her hero is around, a helpless and sweet little bird within a cage that can't kill you at all, but is secretly quite a bitch and full of herself. Now, why you might ask? Well, that's because, despite love and insight, which usually takes the role of decorating her little cage with roses, she hates anyone with high fortitude. If an employee with fortitude at that level does come to White Lake, then the abnormality will panic about a witch coming to her private domain, lashing out saying things like, "You're trying to bully me, butcher, monster, witch," and eventually calls on her warrior to save your dear lake. Now, the warrior is an employee who she loves the most and has her ego gift, aka the crown, and whenever she calls upon her warrior to save her, that employee becomes possessed and bears their sword, and tries to reach her princess, who is currently trying to drown the monster. Yeah, very innocent abnormality there. Either way though, very cool abnormality. I love her ballerina-like design and her personality despite being a bitch. Red Queen is yet another 10th level abnormality that is quite literally a Red Queen. Queen based off of the Queen of Hearts in playing cards and the Queen in Alice in Wonderland, which is the biggest inspiration towards a good amount of abnormalities that do appear in Wonderlab. But nevertheless, this abnormality, despite being a 10th, is slightly complex, in which as long as she's satisfied, there won't be any problems. However, it's quite difficult to tell on what exactly she likes and dislikes, in account of the fact that she doesn't really show any emotion, and the fact that if she is isn't satisfied, you get beheaded in an instant. But thanks to Kat, the main protagonist of Wonderlab, Lobotomy Corporation knows a tad bit on what she does like, and will show a genuine emotion if she likes something, like soda, for example. But other than that though, Red Queen is alright, though not the best abnormality in Wonderlab, in my opinion. You remember when I said that it was quite easy to tell who the remaining 4 abnormalities are for the 7 princesses group, and how I said Rapunzel can be one of them? Well, let me introduce you to Tangle, an abnormality that is most likely based off of Rapunzel, and probably isn't a part of said group considering that it was never mentioned. Tangle is the last 10th abnormality in Wonderlab, and it takes the form of a giant head with a lot of hair, just enough to cover the entire room with it. The best way to work with it is through what seems to be instinct work by brushing its hair, and every time you finish your work with it, it keeps track of how many times you have brushed its hair, which can go up in the thousands. Once it believes you have done enough, Tangle will try to convince you to let it breach, or otherwise you die. Overall, it's a pretty simple abnormality, even in its design, but it's alright, I guess, though I do wish that Tangle had a little bit more to it. The first WoW level abnormality, Hookah Caterpillar, is quite meh in the beginning, but is quite cool after a certain moment. But we'll get to that later. So, Hookah Caterpillar is a lazy as fuck abnormality that doesn't do anything but lays around on its mushroom, though still it's quite a nuisance to deal with. Mostly because it has its own counter called the Eclosion counter, where it increases for every time someone does any type of work on it, other than a level 5 repression. Whenever the Eclosion counter increases, the more blue smoke it spews out, which constantly deals pale damage, and allows the abnormality to feast on negative emotions that come from painful memories. Which sounds terrible, but it allows for more energy to be made. However, this process will, of course, quickly fill the counter to max. So to prevent that, you need to do a level 5 repression work on it, which doesn't make as much energy as you would normally, but it will stop the eclosion counter from increasing. So what happens when the counter reaches max? Well, it evolves from a caterpillar to a butterfly, and then breaches, constantly spewing smoke all over the place and passively killing you with pale damage. Overall, a very cool abnormality in concept, but would probably be quite annoying to manage in gameplay, though a good majority of them would be alright to deal with, maybe. Our first and only Zane abnormality in Wonderlab, Bottle of Tears, is the first abnormality that Kat has worked with when she was first hired, and as the name implies, it's a big old bottle filled with some water and is covered by a cake. And as long as you don't eat the cake, you're fine to work with it however, which is why it's a Zane in the first place, and a very safe one at that, as long as you don't eat the cake. Otherwise, if you do so, the entire containment unit would be covered in water and your soul would drown from the immense amount of water, under normal circumstances at least. Since Kat is the MC, she can't die due to plot reasons. Otherwise, yeah, very simple abnormality to work with, but also very boring in my opinion. Though, as I say in abnormality, this shouldn't be too surprising, I guess. The Drowned Sisters are a pair of 2 girls with flowers covering their faces, and the 2 only want one thing: a listener, someone to listen to their woes, regrets, and sorrows, to the point that it will deal a lot of mental damage to the employee. But it won't necessarily be too bad, since the employees forget all of the ramblings that the Drowned Sisters had prepared for the employee, although they need to be checked up on quite regularly since they want listeners to listen to their woes, otherwise they will drown the entire containment unit and eventually breach. At least that's what I think, since it wasn't mentioned that it can breach. But other than what I have already said, there's not much else on them since there's only a half chapter dedicated to them and nothing else, so yeah. Piscean Mermaid is, well, a mermaid that yearns for love. She's obsessed with it to the point that she repeats the same old thing: love me, give me a love, give me a soul, etc. To the point that she has mutilated herself for love. She can also manipulate others to fall in love with her if she wants to, via her comb that she gives out from time to time. If you do fall in love with her, she consumes your soul and absorbs your body. Thus, in order to survive, you need to reject her love in 2 ways. The common way is through repression work, which consists of dumping sea salt on her. Another is to reject her gift altogether, which causes her to enrage and breach containment. Don't really know how that would be implemented in the gameplay, but hey, whatever. At least we got a pretty cool battle from that, where Kat just mutilates the fuck out of her. Stain and Rose is pretty cool, I say. Though I think that 1, some of the abnormalities are much better than this one, some of which we'll get into in a bit. And 2, I think the whole plot point of it being very dangerous is kind of over-exaggerated, maybe? I don't know. Maybe that's just me who has dealt with abnormalities similar to it in Lobotomy Corporation Tolkien, but whatever. So this abnormality is a pure white rose that wants to resonate with one single person, which sounds simple at first, but soon enough you'll realize that this flower is one demanding bitch. Essentially, as said before, only one person is needed to work on this abnormality after fulfilling some conditions, which essentially dumbs down to any employee that are on the level of cat or above. Once an employee of that level begins to work with the abnormality, it will start to resonate with that employee, and is then needed to be sent in with the same employee periodically. If there is anyone else that works with it, or if that one person doesn't work with the rose for a certain period of time, then it spreads a disease, killing multiple people at once while people are coughing up some flowers, which can spread from person to person, by the way. However, once the resonance is complete, it will grow big, change its colors to red, and kill the resonating employee as a sacrifice. And after that, it will become stagnant for a bit, and will reset after a certain amount of time has passed. Essentially, staining rose is a combination of both melting love, with the whole infection thing that is a tad bit more deadly, and backward clock, in which you have to sacrifice one high-level employee to save everyone else. Overall, again, it's cool, but there are other abnormalities that I find to be better than this one. Now, these last few abnormalities are not necessarily unique, but are rather cool to talk about. It's also a nice way to finish this long as fuck video off, I guess, so yeah. These abnormalities are known as aberrations, which was a concept introduced in Wonderlab, where there are certain abnormalities that have variations of them that do exist. This concept does exist in Limbus Company through certain abnormalities such as Der Fluch, Bluish Star, and Ebony Queen's Apple. In Wonderlab, there are 6 of them: Penitent Girl, Pygmalion, Titania, Nobody Is, Blue Smocked Shepherd, and Reddened Buddy. Penitent Girl is just like Red Shoes, in which she wants feet and will manipulate some low-level employees to come to her. But the difference is that while Red Shoes wants the feet of multiple people and has its victim collect them for her, Penitent Girl wants feet of her own, since she lacks a pair, and the employee that she manipulates will give their feet to her as a result, which kills them. Other than that though, there's nothing else to talk about in relation to it. Pygmalion is the aberration of Alorine, where unlike Alorine, Pygmalion is more focused on love and marriage rather than yearning to be human from a doll. Now, Wonderlab doesn't really focus on what Pygmalion does when it's in containment, but rather shows what it can do when it breaches. It seems like someone doesn't know the fact that you need to be neutral with it in order for it to stay in containment. I slightly talked about Titania in a video that I made a long time ago about the fairies, where Titania is the Aleph aberration of Fairy Festival that seeks her husband, Oberon, who is her nemesis, and seeks her child. Though it seems to be that Oberon doesn't actually exist, so who knows. Though I did make an assumption that our Fairy Festival is Oberon, but we'll never know either way. She looks cool though, too bad that it was quite underutilized in Wonderlab, along with another cool looking aberration, Nobody Is, which is an aberration of Nothing There, whereas Nothing There wants to mimic anyone and get a body of their own, Nobody Is wants to become a certain person, someone special, essentially. Though it was quite underutilized in Wonderlab just as much as Titania, where it appears, it escapes, and as we were going to get a cool battle between Titania and Nobody Is, the facility is destroyed and we don't get to see them again, which is sad to see, because I would have loved to see more of them. Now, the last two aberrations, Blue Smocked Shepherd and Reddened Buddy, are aberrations of Red Hooded Mercenary and Big and Woolly Bad Wolf. And just like the two of them, these aberrations are related to each other. In fact, they are quite literally connected, where if there is oppression work being done on the Blue Shepherd, the Reddened Buddy will be hurt and in pain in the process. Thus, the two have to be managed together at the same time, where the other employee needs to comfort and calm the Reddened Buddy down. Otherwise, the Buddy will transform and breach, along with the Shepherd at the same time, who believes that only they can stop the wolf. Now, in my opinion, I think that these two are my favorite aberrations in Wonderlab, because of how similar yet different they are to the original abnormalities comparatively to other aberrations, where the Red Mercenary wants vengeance on what the wolf has done to her. The Blue Shepherd just wants to amuse himself by violently punishing his dog to become the Crimson Wolf, thus convincing others that he is the rightful shepherd that can predict anything. And while the wolf is destined to be the big bad wolf, even if he doesn't want that, the Reddened Buddy, despite the constant abuse and violence, wants his master's attention and recognition, and he would do anything to get that, even if it means becoming the wolf that the shepherd wants. I fucking love that dynamic, and plus, Wonderlab does a very good job of portraying this sort of abuse, and making you despise the shepherd, my god. But too bad that we will never see them again. Maybe. Again, the situation with Wonderlab is very unclear. Maybe they will come back one day, though we will never know, I suppose. And that's it. That was a lot, you know? Now, there are also a couple few unreleased abnormalities that I've not mentioned, but I'm not really bothered to talk about them since they're either just some stock images or nameless concept art, and that's it. Not much else to talk on that. But either way, though, it really makes you think on what if all those abnormalities were actually released, you know? Now, I'm not really one to talk about hypothetical scenarios a bunch, but, you know, it would be quite interesting to see regardless, to eventually see an abnormality that was meant to be released in Lobotomy Corporation or was shown in Wonderlab and is then actually released in Limbus. But then again, the chances of that actually happening is very, very low, considering how there's only like, what, 1 or 3 abnormalities that are revealed via ego, and all of them are brand new, so like, it's pretty much impossible to see these abnormalities ever again. But you never know, maybe Project Moon finds this video and think, you know, maybe we should make an ego or something based off of one of these abnormalities that we never got to release. Would be pretty funny if that's the case, though still, I can't really see that happening. Anyways, feels good to be back after practically 2 months of not uploading. This is probably not the best video to upload right after Canon happened, but still, might as well make it because I wanted to. So yeah, hope you all enjoyed that video, and bye.